unashamedly, I love being at Dean Clough. I love going there. I love going around the different places to meet all the various people that you see who are doing things that they care about and doing things that they're invested in. To me, our task is to do everything that we can to promote this diverse, eclectic, creative, vibrant mix of people and organisations. And the aspiration is to strive to creating a quality environment. And the belief that in striving to create that quality environment, your opportunity of attracting aspirant people and organisations is enhanced.
Hello and welcome to the Expert Lounge. My name's Carl Veltman and I'm your host today as I welcome onto the sofa another expert in their field, Jeremy Hall, Managing Director.
Yeah, Managing Director and Chairman, yeah.
Of Dean Clough.
Yes.
Hello, Jeremy.
Hello, Carl. It's lovely to be here. Fantastic.
Lovely to have you join me on the sofas. So, you've probably heard a little bit about what we do in the Expert Lounge. And what I'm really interested in is finding out a little bit more about you, your journey, your career, and how you got to where you are today. Right. So, if we could start off looking back, thinking about your background, your journey, and how you got to where you are today. And just to be clear, you are running a 22-acre business and leisure complex.
Yes, yeah. Where do you want me to start? I can start at any point along the journey, really.
Well, start at the bit. Tell me how you got involved with Dean Clough.
Yeah,
and then perhaps
a
bit further back from there.
Yeah, I was going to say if you don't mind, I'll start from further back.
Yeah.
And because actually the inevitable, I think, with all of these things is the thread. The thread is part of that journey, which takes you on a journey which maybe you haven't set out to go on, but you do go on. But the reason you get there is because of all that's gone before. So I would say, oddly, my journey started by wanting to be a rock god when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and by the time I was 10, when I was 10 years old, I went to see David Bowie at St George's Hall when he was Ziggy Stardust, which was just the best gig ever, and it was just fantastic. The slight fly in that ointment was that when I was in the queue outside, somebody turned around to me and said, "Oi, Donny Osmond queue's that way." So for me, in a sense, that starting point of the thing of really music, and I went away to school. Both my parents trained as pianists, although they ended up doing different things. Both my parents trained as pianists at the Royal College in Manchester. But obviously, not obviously, because now it's not just that, but at that time certainly classical. And so I started on this journey of the love of music, and I ended up going away to school, and there was a lot of music which was at that school, and I started doing quite a lot of sort of rock stuff, and I was always interested in sound, the thing about the sound, and that drew me to saxophone. So I started playing saxophone when I was 12, and it was just coincidentally one of my uncles was a clarinet teacher, and my grandfather on my mother's side had bought a saxophone when he was drunk. Being drunk, I don't think was unusual, but buying the saxophone was. and I got this C melody, and my uncle came over and gave me some breathing exercises, showed me the fingering, and in particular.
So was it a alto?
No,
tenor?
It was a C melody, which was normally used for sort of marching bands, and they don't make them anymore. So it was a C melody, which was unusual. But at the point at which coming over, he also brought over some records, and in particular he brought over. So I think I was 12 at the time, and he brought over this record called Jam Session, it was an LP, and there were two tracks on this. On one side was What Is This Thing Called Love, and the other side was Funky Blues, which was obviously a blues they made up on the day. And the rhythm section was Oscar Peterson, Ed Thigpen, Barney Kessel, and not Ron Carter. Anyway, be that as it may, and then the front line was Flip Phillips, Ben Webster, Charlie Parker, Johnny Hodges, and Benny Carter, and Charlie Shavers, and that record. And although the record I think was about 1957, the quality of the recording meant it was quite difficult to distinguish from a tonal point of view when you were changing from one person improvising, for example, on alto saxophones to another. But stylistically, you could start to determine when that change was, and I realised subsequently it was the Charlie Parker solo on that record.
Charlie Parker's a saxophonist.
Charlie Parker was really one of the founders of the bebop, along with Dizzy Gillespie and people like that.
And Oscar Peterson's a pianist?
Oscar Peterson is a pianist who was more in the mainstream, but he was a sort of stalwart of the the jazz. I mean, he was a giant in the jazz scene for years on end, and an incredible pianist. And I mean, this is a very long intro to say how do I get to Dean Clough, but so that as a starting point, that was the thing for me that got me into music. And trying to cut a long story short, I struggled with getting the jazz sound I wanted out of an amplified guitar at that time. And so I sort of made saxophone my main instrument when I was about sort of 14, and then just got completely obsessed. So I'd never do less than 4 or 5 hours practice a day. I wouldn't go on holiday for more than a week, because it was and I would just sit in a room doing scales and patterns and, the Tubby Hayes phrase on the -7 flat 5 dominant 7 flat 9, starting on the flat 5th, and I used to sit in lessons thinking, right, if I was doing that Tubby Hayes phrase but starting on G flat -7 flat 5, and what note would I be starting on and everything else. So I didn't do very well academically, but I put an immense amount of effort into that, and I loved it, and it gave me, I think, two things. Firstly, just that lovely thing of pursuing something that you care about and that matters to you, and that you love, and that you want to recreate. You want to emulate these people that you listen to and think, they're veritable gods, in terms of the stuff that they produce. And I think the other thing for me is also it gave me, a sense of what you need to do to try and make yourself better at what you're doing. And fundamentally I feel I'm a profoundly simple individual, and the simple conclusion I came to was just that you need to work, and when I went to music college, the only people you come across who'd had better technique were people who practiced 8 hours a day, and you think, well, that's justice, isn't it? If you put more work in, you should be better. But for me, the work is for those things, it's never felt like work. It's just, I just couldn't wait to get into a room to just be working at trying to create the music that I wanted to create.
So you mentioned there going to music college. So
yeah.
Presumably you did A-levels.
I did A-levels at school. I've never divulged my results to my family, certainly not my boys, because that wouldn't be a motivator.
No.
So I did A-levels at school, but I was always heading for music college.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, I was at school, ended up then and at the time, I'm going back to the late. I can't remember whether it was 79, I think I went to music college. There were only 2 colleges in the world that did a jazz course. One was Berkeley in America, and the other one was Leeds College of Music. You probably couldn't get more. You get a bit more variety between the two, but probably not that much. And on the basis I'd been away at school, I sort of thought, right, well, I'll never be at home again, living in and around Halifax. So I thought, right, I'll go to Leeds. It felt like a big leap to head over to Berkeley, you know, even to contemplate it, never mind actually physically go. So I ended up at Leeds, and had a fantastic time there, and met some wonderful people, many of whom have carried on in the music business and are beautiful, you know, fabulous musicians. And the thing for me I love about the pursuit of craft is that it's about that lifelong dedication of your love of something that you invest yourself in, and it's never end. There's a never ending journey, and there's a never ending, you know, well of knowledge to dip into.
So what was the journey then from, was it a degree level program? Was it?
Yeah, it was. And I didn't finish it. I did 2 years, and it was in the summer holidays, and a usual thing, I had an overdraft and I wasn't working, although I was occasionally do bits and pieces of gigs, you know, playing wherever, you know, you get 20 quid or 30 quid or whatever it might be. So I was doing bits. I do gigs when you got the opportunity, but it's always, and I think that was one of the things that emotionally and mentally I struggled with was the idea of thinking, how on earth am I actually going to earn a living out of doing this? Obviously people do, but I felt insecure about that, without a shadow of a doubt. And so I was in my summer holidays, and you know, I can remember the overdraft and thinking, right, you know, what do I do about this? And at the time, my father had been in a business which he'd been involved in for sort of 25 some years over in near Leeds, and he'd gone into partnership with Jonathan Silver and somebody else who's connected, Morris Miller, in a place in Huddersfield, and it was an old mill in Huddersfield, and it had lots of cloth, and, you know, there were sort of 50,000 blankets and 100 tons of yarn, and, you know, goodness knows what. And so there was a mill shop there and all sorts. So I just started working in the summer holidays to earn money. And the person I was working with, although my father was involved with it, the person I was working with was Jonathan Silver. And one of the things I'm very mindful of with all of this is that all of these threads have this, you know, for me, what are incredible stories behind them about the people. And Jonathan was somebody that my dad got to know and our family got to know, and he used to have a series of clothes shops called Jonathan Silver Clothes. And just as a sort of track back, you know, when I was, one of the other bands I used to do at school was like a sort of Dr. Morell, and it was a Dr. Feelgood type band, and we used to play various places, but I used to do that on guitar. And we wanted some sort of zoot suit type things, you know, so I rang my dad about it, who, you know, was sort of a bit nonplussed about the idea. But at the time I rang him, in his office was Jonathan, who I'd never met before. And I was at the time probably a 16-year-old or something. And Jonathan came on the phone. He said, right, well, you know, what do you want? What do you want? And I explained what we were doing. And like a week later, you know, these half dozen suits turned up for the band that Jonathan managed to find from somewhere, you know, and that was typical of Jonathan. And so I started working with Jonathan, and Jonathan Silver Clothes, again, sort of trying to cut a long story short, that then, you know, he ended up being in partnership with my dad. That was in sort of early 80s, going through to when we were in this place in Huddersfield in 82. And that was just prior to us going to Dean Clough in 83. So effectively, I was working with Jonathan, and Jonathan subsequently went to Saltsmill. I mean, the sort of endless tangents in terms of these stories. Subsequently went to Saltsmill, and Jonathan, in many ways, was a bit like a sort of older brother to me, really. You know, and he was idiosyncratic. Incredibly engaging, could be very infuriating, but incredibly engaging, and just, sometimes completely sort of wacky, off the wall, but fabulous. He was the absolute reverse of what you'd think of as a sort of, what you'd expect, for example, in a corporate business. He was the complete reverse, and so he was a great person to start working with, simply as much as anything, because he was, you learnt a lot from him, but at the same time, he was it ended up often being a lot of fun. You know what I mean? So it wasn't remotely the conventional thing. And when I started working, one of the things I did was move 100 tons of yarn from one part of the mill to another part of the mill. And by move it, I mean physically move it. They're all in these old skeps. My back's never been quite the same since. And then also, cold selling yarn that I knew nothing about. Ringing people up and saying, I've got some twofold 36 skein black worsted, and really having no idea what this stuff was, but sort of that experience, which I found very intimidating. The thing of sort of an 18, 19-year-old picking up the phone and ringing people who know about what you're talking about, and you're trying to sell them something you know nothing about. Was a bit of I found quite an intimidating experience, and a massive contrast to having had years sitting in a room, where you're just like doing scales and patterns, and yes, and obviously you work with other people, but a very big percentage of your time is just working at your craft, basically.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds to me that was a real grounding for you, the work with Jonathan.
Definitely.
What would you say were the main things that you got from that experience, from that relationship with Jonathan, and how has that supported you moving forward?
I think, firstly, I think he was somebody who was, he was always somebody who would think. So he wouldn't go down a predetermined route just because everybody went down that route. So he wouldn't approach anything necessarily, in the same way as anybody else. He might do, but he wasn't in any sense preoccupied with being in any way conventional, if you know what I mean. And so he was a character and similarly, my dad's very much a character, but coming from a different sort of perspective. Jonathan was really quite zany on occasions. After he'd left Dean Clough and he went to Salt's Mill, I remember him ringing me one time. He said, Jez, I just had the fire officer here. And he was really getting on my nerves, and I had a glass of water and I just said fire and threw it over him. Now, there are very, very few people who ever do anything like that, but Jonathan was sort of out there, but also quite a wonderfully engaging individual. But I think a combination of elements, really. I think with Jonathan, and I think with my father, both of them are people who think, and I would say they think independently. So it's often that you can be posed questions or lines of questioning or whatever it may that tempt you to go down, because in a way you know where somebody's trying to take you, and they tempt you to go down a particular route. And I think with both of them, they are well. Jonathan sadly died. My dad, thankfully, is still alive. But both of them are people who were capable of thinking outside of what the other person talking to them was expecting them to say or do. And I think that bluntly, they're both very intelligent people who have got independent thought. And to me, that's a fabulous quality.
I think a lot of people have talked. I've talked to a lot of guests on the podcast about their training, about their route through to their current role, and what they've sort of got from different experiences. But it's really interesting that you've really picked up on the idea of a role model, or an influencer, or, and I don't mean the sort of new term for influencing, but that idea of someone who leaves a mark on you and an impression, and that's why those stories are so memorable, because of the individual that was involved in them. I think you've captured there the sense that perhaps your journey wasn't a going to business school, going through leadership and management programs, but actually it was a rolling your sleeves up, getting stuck in and doing the work, learning from those role models around you.
Yeah, and I think inevitably, I don't think there's a right and there's a sense of binary, absolutely right and wrong way. Because I'm sure, I know for sure there's so much stuff I'm sure I could learn if I was educated in those areas. But what I do know is the experiences that I've had along my journey. And the other thing I would certainly say is that, and it's not about business, but it's about behaviour. The other thing categorically, I think for me is that my mother was somebody who had an incredibly strong moral compass, and she was, to me, she was driven by all the right things, and she would follow that path irrespective of the consequences because she believed it was right. And that's something which I've always massively admired in terms of her as a personality. I mean, she died 30 years ago, but left equally an incredibly strong impression on me. And it's something which, frankly, I set for myself as the sort of standard to aspire to, knowing that often I find it difficult to achieve that same position, because Mum was unyielding in those things, but in a way which was incredible. When we were young, if you're driving along and which wasn't untypical then, you'd see somebody bashing a child round the head or something. It's nothing to do with whether it was the right thing to do or not, but Mum would stop and remonstrate. Now, whether that was the best thing to do in that situation is not the question, but the point I'm making is that she found it. She was incapable of going past something she felt was not right, and she had to. For her, she had to intervene, which as children was very embarrassing, But it was a testament to her moral compass and where she needed to be with all of that.
And I guess an influence in terms of being values driven in your approach to business.
Yes. Well, I think it's so. If I'll very quickly sort of summarise the route then into Dean Clough, which was that starting work with Jonathan, and my dad was on the periphery of that, and that was in '82, and then we went to look round. Dean Clough was on the market, and we went to look round it. In early '83, and in a very short period of time, put an offer in, and then ended up being there.
Listen, in the hope that we've got some viewers and listeners of the podcast who aren't familiar with this area.
Sorry, yeah.
Can you just tell us?
Yeah. So
tell us a little bit. What is Dean Clough?
Right, Dean Clough. First of all, Dean and Clough are both Old English words which mean valley and ravine, and the mills which are there, which are Dean Clough Mills, took the name of their name from the place, and the mills were built by the Crossley family roughly between about 1840 and 1870, although their business incepted there earlier than that. So they built the buildings roughly between the major buildings that you see and are notable today, between 1840 and 1870, and so they are stone multi-storey buildings in the main, 6 to 10 stories high. The site is half a mile from one end to the other, covering, as you mentioned earlier, 22 acres. So they are these strong, resolute, stone-built buildings, and they quarried the stone out of the hillside. So they quarried the stone and then built the buildings, and you've got some good examples of that, where you go into a building on one side and then the ground floor is 4 stories up on the other side, but you're into rock at the back of the building. So they're these incredibly strong sort of you used a word earlier, honest and resolute buildings which are there, and that was the turn of the 1900s. They were probably the largest carpet manufacturers in the world. On a shift basis, they employed about 5,000 people on site. And they were a massive force, in the sense that they had, out of the family, they had numerous MPs. They donated many things in terms of the town. There's the Crossley Heath School, which was built by the Crossleys, but as an orphanage. And if you think, well, it's a school today for 1,200 some pupils, and that was built as an orphanage. I mean, it's an extraordinary contemplation. And our journey since we started in 1983 has been about two things, really: physically transforming those buildings in order that they're capable of working for companies and organizations and people, and the considering and contemplating the elements that are needed, and trying to encourage the elements that are needed to create a sense of place and destination. And to me, that's about the combination of celebrating the buildings and hopefully bringing out the best qualities of the buildings. And a lot of those qualities about sustainability, about longevity. When you talk about things like carbon, you cannot have something which is better in building terms than something which has been there for 150 years. The carbon, you're not using any carbon by using the building. And then actually what it is that you do to complement that and sort of emphasize those qualities. And I think the other, so Dean Clough today is this myriad community of 140 businesses, people, organizations, entities, with employing over sort of 3,000 people, with everything from cafes and restaurants and bars and hairdressers and beauticians and physiotherapists and therapists and part of the Department of Works and Pensions and insurance companies, and this fantastic cross section of people and organizations. And to me, the thing you're always aspiring to is the idea of finding and attracting creative and aspirant people and organizations who want to do what they care about and what they believe in, to bring something else about. And I think, I'm sitting here having been there for 40 and a half years, which seems, in most people's terms, seems ridiculous. But what I know is that what has maintained my passion, my excitement, and my emotional reward in what we do is because you're constantly coming across people are doing things which you couldn't have imagined, and people are resonating with place, and they're wanting to influence what happens next as a result of the things that they do and they care about. So in a way, you're forever in that position of experiencing new things, seeing new things, having your eyes open. So it's not about finding people who resonate with what you want to do. It's not about what we want to do. It's about the platform that allows people to do things which are exciting and stimulating.
So, I mean, I've been around Dean Clough. I think it's an amazing building.
We've only shown you the good bits.
Probably. But, I've seen and been into a diverse range of businesses in the complex. And, if you sat down and sort of handpicked all of the individuals and organisations that you've got there, you'd be hard-pressed to do a better job of creating the kind of eclectic, vibrant,
it's just wonderful
place that you have.
Yeah.
How has it happened then? Because you haven't influenced it. You've said that this has come about from place, from the people and their sense of place, and
in terms of how do you end up with that amalgam, I think I think the things that we've tried to do to frame the platform are about an approach and an attitude to the reuse of the buildings, and we've absolutely set out with the idea of trying to adopt a best practice approach to the conversions and the uses, and celebrating the qualities of the buildings. So you want to think about what are the elements that actually create the character of the buildings, and it's about their materials, their story. So I think first of all, it's that thing of trying to respect the buildings and the nature of the buildings in the process of reusing them, and so
you've renovated.
So that's a deliberate aspiration to say, right, we want to celebrate these buildings.
Yeah.
We want to emphasise the qualities that make them those buildings rather than something else. So in a sense, getting to the point of saying, we're not trying to make it something it's not, but we're trying to celebrate what it is, but then to think about what else can you add to that to complement what it is. And in very, boring practical terms, you say, well, bringing out those physical qualities of the buildings, but at the same time, how do you get a good EPC rating or whatever? What are the elements you need to incorporate? So I think that thing of an aspiration towards best practice, and I think an aspiration towards best practice on the basis that the belief that underpins that is that by striving towards quality, that you have the best opportunity to attract people who are aspirant in their own worlds and what it is they're doing. So to me, I think that's absolutely a bedrock of saying, the aspiration is to strive to creating a quality environment. And the belief that in striving to create that quality environment, your opportunity of attracting aspirant people and organisations is enhanced. And I sometimes I wonder whether, in a sense, without having to specifically articulate it, the very nature of all the messages that you give out in the process of doing it, in a sense, define your audience. Because the types of approaches you have, my father was the first person to advocate the idea that we should, have artist studios and gallery spaces and everything else, and just by the very nature of those things, you start to define the type of cohort of people and organisations, what it is that you're trying to find people who resonate with the things that you love and believe in and care about.
And that's what links back to, we'll go right back to your music college and the passion, and and values driven leadership.
It's the same thing to me.
You've driven the organisation forward with that passion, with those values. You make a commitment, don't you, through the allocation of space to creatives, to the arts, through the galleries. That could be commercial space.
It could be, but I mean, in a sense, arguing, I don't mean against the use, but arguing against, in a sense, an element of that, not quite, but in a way, my argument would be to say, but the problem is if the less variety and the diversity you have, then actually the danger with that is that you restrict the people that you start to diminish the place as a place that people hopefully feel attracted to. And it sounds incredibly simple, but to me, it's that thing of thinking, trying to create somewhere where you feel I would like to be, I'd like to be there. I like to go there. I mean, unashamedly, I love being at Dean Clough. I love going there. I love going around the different places, talking to to me, it feels the most incredible privilege to be able to go from one end of the site to the other and to meet all the, various people that you see who are doing things that they care about and doing things that they're invested in and they're passionate about. And you just think, what a blissful thing to be involved in. I mean, I feel a huge sense of privilege to be involved in something that I do that I love and I care about. And
I don't think you can underestimate your own role and your father's role in creating that environment. If, there could have been other families, other organisations that had taken over that estate, would it look and feel like it does today?
I think it's one of those things, isn't it? It's impossible to go back and sort of replay the story in many ways. But I think, it's undoubtedly that there are elements which we've got there which are a reflection of I suppose our personalities and the things that we care about. But I also believe that those elements are something that have a material value. And I'm not talking about value in terms of money, albeit ultimately when you're running a business or everything, it does come back to that. But actually, I think before you get to that point, to me, the thing which is important is, what I feel I value is trying to do something which actually, in the simplest of terms, people want to engage with. Mm-hmm. Because actually, whatever the other elements, if you don't create something that people want to embrace in one way or another, then ultimately they won't. And to me, our task is to do everything that we can to promote this diverse, eclectic, creative, vibrant mix of people and organisations. And what I find so exciting and humbling is that it's a constant process of people coming in. We've got somebody coming in who's going to be doing a heat and ice therapy centre, and they're starting doing their fit out at the moment. And you think, well, I didn't, because I'm old, I didn't even know these things existed virtually. And then somebody else talking to today who's a sort of bespoke tailor, but this, that, the other, and he loves the idea, and you're coming across these people who've got their aspirations about what they're doing, and they see their future wonderfully. They see their future at Dean Clough, and you think, what a fantastic thing,
I'm thinking about some of the other organisations that perhaps you haven't mentioned. So there's a hotel.
Yeah. Travelodge Hotel,
a wedding venue.
There's a wedding dress retailer. There's a creche.
The restaurants.
Yeah,
the
bars,
restaurants, the theatre.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's and when I'm talking about it and saying I think it's wonderful, I would hate to think somebody was thinking we're talking about us. I'm not. I'm talking about that mix of people who make Dean Clough what it is. And to me, that's the privilege of doing what I do, to my mind. Mm-hmm. Is that the wonderful combination of people that we deal with in the process of doing that?
As soon as I came to Calderdale College and we came over to Dean Clough and met you, we'd already got some art and design provision there at the college. But we walked away from there thinking, wow, this is somewhere that we have got to do. We've got to do more with. We've got to find a way of connecting. I think, we'd set out our 6 Ps: people, place, prosperity, partnerships, performance, planet. I think yours is the 7th, which is passion. And I think they've sort of come together really well. We've got that whole floor of the mill that we're now converting into a new creative art space, digitalisation of those arts. So we've got esports, computer games design, and a brand new TV and film studio. That's really exciting.
It's absolutely wonderful, and I think it's impossible to underestimate the impact of something like that. And to me, the other thing is the fact that it's also about having student provision. Because I love, you just think, how can it not be, such a wonderful, healthy thing to have that mixture? And the fact that you've got the mixture of people coming for learning, but also the fact that you've got businesses who are there, who are looking for people to employ in terms of those disciplines as well. And to my mind, the opportunity that it's that thing of the breadth of people who think of Dean Clough as part of their experience and part of, for want of a better way of describing it, their home. And to me, you just think that's because you want everybody. To me, the lovely thing is for everybody to feel it's theirs, because it is. It's not ours. Because Dean Clough has been born of the place, and the people who have created it, both historically and today, are about the community in which we're all in. And to me, that then it's about the place resonating with the community of people and organisations and everything else that we're immersed within. And further, that for example, this summer we've got the Dale Castell is doing a big DJ, for want of a better word, I'm not quite sure what the right terminology is, but sort of rave event with loads of DJs and everything else.
I'll be there.
Yeah, and it was
right up my street.
Yeah, but honestly, he did it, and he did it last year, and it was a wonderful. The vibe was fantastic. And he's doing it again this year, but it's sort of even bigger event. But one of the main things he cites within it, in terms of the publicity which he's sent out on it initially, is the fact that his grandfather, his grandmother, and his father, his mother, all worked at Dean Clough. Amazing. And that, to me, that's the bit that you get with the whole thing about history and legacy, that you have all these threads that connect people with place. Which it doesn't happen in terms of the sense, it doesn't happen just because you've got a building which is put up today. It happens because there's all that history. And to me, that's the thing which I think is so powerful about the reusing of historic assets, because actually so many people have their relationship within it, which transcends, all of us who are here today. None of us were here when we were there. And to me, you sort of see that thread running through in a way where you say, in another 100 years' time, there will be all these people who still have that sense of connection with place, which will be beautiful.
You've got to nurture that to some extent.
Yes.
If you're an owner, is that different to a custodian? You are sort of carrying that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
forward,
I think of our role very much as custodianship, because it's about nurturing and enabling where we can what is there, and working in the way that has been fantastic. Yourselves coming down and seeing your sense of opportunity and prospect and future in terms of invested in that community as well, and that's the whole point. It's about how people resonate with the place and then see the opportunities for how they can do something which works for them, but in the process inevitably is going to impact the future of Dean Clough.
I think I really like the phrase custodianship.
Yeah, me too.
Because it sort of celebrates that idea that you can care and nurture and do something with integrity, and the idea that you're not just it's kind of selfless, that you're doing it for others to enjoy at some point, or to pass on, or to pass the baton to.
Yes.
And I know certainly I feel that way about the work that we do here at the college, the idea that we are the senior leadership team right now, but our job is to care and nurture and look after this college, this superb facility and community asset, and get it to a point where it's in even better shape when we hand it to the next person.
Absolutely.
I'm looking through these questions. You've very naturally answered some of these, so I think we've touched on how music really sort of influenced.
I think what else could I think of? I think music. I think the interesting thing, the thing to me which I love about craft is that thing of the work that goes into it. And we talked earlier about Oscar Peterson and a wonderful friend of mine who I was at music college with, who is a most fantastic pianist, but she's a professor at the Royal College in London of composition and arranging. Nikki Isles, and Nikki was saying she was reading a biography of Oscar Peterson, and bear in mind Oscar Peterson was probably one of the most prolific performing pianists, as in the sense he would be performing all year round, all around the world. But she was saying, in this particular biography, there'd be occasions when he wasn't touring, and he might be sitting at the piano for 18 hours a day or something, something absolutely ridiculous. Now, the thing I find actually when I get home in the evening and I sit at the guitar, what often happens is I fall asleep over the guitar. So I don't know how he manages 18 hours, but it's an illustration of that, the commitment. And there was a guy who was a real mentor to me, a guy called Bobby Wellens, who was a sort of hard knocks Glaswegian. He died a few years ago, and had a very, very a colourful life, one might say, but absolutely beautiful musician. And I remember getting a postcard from him when he was 75, and he said, I'm on holiday with Isabel and his 2 daughters in Spain. And bear in mind, he's deemed to be a world-class saxophonist, and he says, I'm having to resort to practicing in the cupboard in the hotel bedroom, at 75 years of age. And that thing of the pursuit, the dedication, and I think that's the thing. And to me, people talk about creatives or creative businesses, and to me, I think what's very important to remember is it's not about sector. To me, I think of it's not about sector. To me, what I think about that is it's about attitude. I don't think it matters what sector you're in. Fundamentally, it's about the attitude that is applied to what it is you're doing, and I think a lot of that's about caring and pursuing and striving to do what you do better than you did last year. And to me, that's that wonderful thing about, in a sense, which inevitably goes hand in hand with pursuing a craft. But the reality is, I think all the best businesses that's what they're doing as well.
I think it's interesting actually to hear you talk, because there is still a misconception amongst some parents, I think, that choosing a sort of creative or softer subject doesn't necessarily develop technical skills.
Yeah.
And actually, when you talk about musicianship, musicality, the work and the craft that has to go in, it is absolutely...
to me, the key thing is that process of learning. Because the reality is, whether you can do that or not, I mean, it's just something you learn, isn't it? But your desire to do it, the motivation behind striving to be better, is the thing. So nurturing that desire to learn is what matters. What you're learning virtually becomes something which is slightly secondary, because it's actually that thing of understanding that actually your route forward is, to me, through work, application, and constructive criticism of what it is you're doing and how can you do it better. And actually the subject,
are those principles that you've applied outside of music?
I mean, I hope so. From in terms of how I've thought about what we do, I hope so. But I might not be the best judge of that. Do you know what I mean? But to me, it is that thing of it's working at wanting to be beyond where you are, and and I love that I mean, so now, if I get home in the evening, I'll be sitting in my music room and I'm trying to teach myself, get muscle memory of inversions of, so if I'm doing a minor 7 flat 5, doing it in different inversions on the fretboard and just trying to get it rooted into my head, because the stuff's rooted in my head is already there, but it would be nice to be better.
I mean, you're saying this, I feel like a terrible parent now, because I've got 3 kids, 2 of them are learning guitar, and and one started on the drums, but they're at the very, very beginning of their journey.
That's fantastic.
But Jeremy, I don't think I can put up with 12 hours of drumming a day.
Yeah.
And the same riff.
But
They're doing
but
the doon, 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 doon.
Yeah.
So they're doing that over and over again. But it is muscle memory.
Of course it is. Yeah, of course it is. And I just think, it's. I mean, I have to say, my boys have ended up not pursuing anything in terms of music, and I would have loved it if they did. But to me, the when I think back to, for me, the thing that categorically drove me to that is just simply the love of the music and wanting to emulate that, basically, and that's undoubtedly been the thing, and when and for me, if I play, I don't, ultimately I can pull I mean, I'm a rubbish guitarist ultimately, but I can get away with it, I could sit and do a gig and fool quite a lot of the people, but I'm sensible enough not to fool myself.
Do you still play saxophone now?
No, I haven't played saxophone for donkey's years because it's, well, not donkey, for probably 5 years, and mainly because I just feel like I'm trying to play catch up, because I didn't develop my jazz playing on guitar as much. If I do guitar, and then I'm sort of learning more rather than trying to play catch up. Which is, frankly, I just find a bit more satisfying. But the other thing as well is I've been able to finally get a sort of combination of elements, which has given me the jazz sound that I wanted, which I never got to before.
Well, look, I mean, when you're talking about the nuances of a jazz sound, I won't be able to step up to that. But I have got an alto saxophone at home.
Oh, do you?
I could get some basic notes out. Maybe,
awesome.
Maybe we should...
absolutely.
Episode 2, and we'll perhaps duet.
Do a jam.
We'll keep my line very simple.
I love it.
So, what I like to explore on this podcast is everybody talks about their journey and Tell me something that's been a setback, something that has required you to really dig deep and find a way to navigate around it.
There are things which have been very challenging, difficult, and I think the thing I would say really with all of that is, I'd say the key lessons are about trying to have the best people around you as possible. So that thing of, in whatever situation you find yourself, I think, having good people who are really clear thinkers and capable and emotionally robust is enormously important. Mm-hmm. Trying to always understand that you are an individual, but you're doing a role, and there's a distinction between those things. So not making it about you. Mm-hmm. So I think making that distinction, I think that's always incredibly important, and trying to maintain that boundary about where that boundary is between you and the nature of the role that you do, and to apply yourself, to the challenges, and sort of just head down and push forward. You know what I mean?
Anything about that journey that you might have done differently?
I started all of this with sort of saying, well, I'll take you back to where my starting point really, and I think all of that's true in that, your perspectives are honed by your journey, aren't they? Where you've been and what you've done, and the people you've come across and the experiences that you've had. And I think one of the difficult things then is that you're also mindful that to shift that would shift that perspective. And you're talking about it from the perspective that you're in now. And I think as a result of that, it becomes difficult to think of doing things differently, because it would, by the very nature of saying you're doing it differently, you wouldn't be in the same place you are today. And then you say, well, would you change where I am today? And there might be some things which would be nice to be slightly different, but fundamentally, would I change anything in terms of would I be in a different place than I am today? No, I wouldn't want to be. I wouldn't mind there being something slightly differently, but actually, in terms of what it is that I do, the people that are around me, the people that are invested in that same thing, then I wouldn't change any of that.
I think I just want to come back to us developing a new facility in the mill. So it's called Mill Studios. Yeah. Hopefully that's the start of a bigger facility and an even deeper relationship between the college and Dean Clough. What does the site offer for students who might be thinking about coming to study on one of those courses? And what does the college bring in Mill Studios to Dean Clough? What does that mean?
What I hope is that the experience people have in terms of, and students will have coming to Dean Clough, is a sense of welcome and a sense of an openness, and the opportunity to be immersed in that community in a way that allows them to experience not only the course that they're on, but the community in which they're coming to, and hopefully feel, in the best sense, embraced by. And to me, you come back to the same things, which is that breadth of community offers, a wonderful diversity and colour, and that's not, to me, that's not easily found, I don't believe.
I don't think it's easily replicated. I mean,
no.
It is a unique environment,
and it's precisely because you've got all these different people who make it what it is, and I think I find it a wonderful thing to engage with because of all of that, diverse character which is there, and the colour of that community.
I mean, you don't have to tell me any excuse. I'm actually down there later this afternoon for a meeting,
and to me, I think that's something that hopefully people, putting aside the specific things they engage with, but hopefully it's something that they feel in the process of going there. I'd also hope, to me, that thing of feeling safe, in all senses within an environment, I think is hugely important. And the great thing, this sort of Dean Clough is a sort of whole community, and by that what I mean is, it's a defined site. So there's that sense of the clarity of that, and the how it's encapsulated in a way which hopefully promotes those feelings of feeling comfortable and all of those type of things.
I mean, for us as a college, it's a really unique proposition because we are going to be delivering training to young people and adults in an environment that is literally surrounded by employers, by creative professionals, by the very people and organisations that are making a living or building a company and a brand through that work. Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier your art provision that you've had for a number of years there, and the same thing's true of that, which is that you cheek by jowl with artists who are earning a living from their art, whether it be painting, illustration, or whatever that might be, and to me, it's that wonderful combination of all of those elements. I think for the Dean Clough community that is there now, in advance of the Mill Studios being in operation, I mean the idea then that you've got an education facility which is covering all the sectors that you're talking about, the tech, the e-gaming and everything else. To me, it's just, I think that's a fabulous addition for the existing community, because everybody's, the preoccupation is how do you find the right people. Ultimately, it's about the people that you're employing and the right people to employ, and trying to retain people in terms of, having an environment that is somewhere where people want to be, they enjoy being, they want to work. And so I think the juxtaposition of the studios and that training facility and the education facility with, as you say, all those businesses and organisations, I think is a wonderful combination. And to me, the thing I love about it is the idea that it feels there's a sort of wholeness to that. The education isn't happening somewhere which is remote from, and the business isn't happening somewhere which is remote from, but that you've got a community which is embracing all of those elements, and hopefully you end up with a real osmosis between the two.
Yeah. I think it's magnetic as a place. I want to keep going back, and I think you really feel that force when you're in it. I'm probably not the only one, because I think that there's been a lot of media and film and TV interest.
Yes.
Not only in Halifax, obviously, there's been Happy Valley, but Halifax is now becoming known as the Hollywood of, or the Hollywood of the North.
Yes, yeah.
So I know that Dean Clough is featured in a Marvel series, yeah.
And Happy Valley. We were the police station for the last series.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, in F-Mill. So the internal of the police station was a floor in F-Mill for the last series. Yeah,
brilliant. Well, what do you think that is adding? So you're bringing in this, really high profile international. Film, TV, and broadcast interest. What does that mean, and how's that helping to put Halifax on the map?
I think it's as simple as broadening the cohort of people who are engaging with Calderdale and Halifax, and in the process of doing that, people being aware of and thinking about Halifax and Calderdale in a way that they may never have come across before, not thought about before. And if you think, for example, of all the gigs which are going on at the Peace Hall, it's that thing. It's changed. For me, what it's doing is it's changing people's perception of the area, and it's broadening the appeal, and it's broadening the draw of Halifax and Calderdale.
The problem with that sort of lineup is, how do you pick who you're going to go to?
Yeah.
I want to go to every single one.
Yeah, and wonderful, wonderful.
And I suppose,
sorry,
I was just going to say, so it's not only what's happening at Dean Clough, but it's that sort of wider footprint as well, and about how what's happening in Dean Clough connects with what's happening at the Peace Hall, what's happening at the college.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to me, and also all that's happening in terms of Calderdale, in terms of the investment in the infrastructure which is taking place, because it's all about shifting people's perception of Halifax and Calderdale. And that is good for all of us, And I think the film industry is something which has happened upon Calderdale, and obviously Sally Wainwright with Happy Valley, Gentleman Jack, and then there's the next series which is in process, which is Riot Women, I think. So there's all that, and it's has a massive impact in terms of the perception that people have, and the numbers of people who are aware of and thinking about and contemplating Halifax as a location. And to me, what you come back to is this thing about character and diversity. I'm not just talking about Dean Clough, but across Calderdale. And Calderdale is incredibly rich in all of that resource, and if you then look at that in terms of the education provision, obviously in terms of that you're doing in terms of the college, but also, prior to that in terms of the secondary education, Calderdale is very well placed in terms of all the education provision. And then if you look at that in terms of the housing stock and the countryside and your location between Leeds and Manchester, listen, at the end of the day, I'm selling, but the point is it's real. The thing is, I'm selling it, but the fact is it's real. Yeah. Those elements are real. And then you think about, all the different, smaller towns you've got within Calderdale, Hebden Bridge, Brighouse, there's some fantastic places. And there's just so much which is about this locality. It's not about an identikit location. You talk about somewhere where it's got those ingredients which are specific to this place. And for me, I think, post-COVID, I think people are more in tune with, more interested in that thing of the character and diversity than they've ever been.
I'm really interested. At the end of every episode, we ask our guests to imagine if they could go back in time and to send their teenage self. Were they around at the time, as in mobile phones?
Yes, yeah.
Send yourself a text with a piece of advice, knowing what you know now and how you got here. What would that text message say?
I find that a really, really difficult. I mean, there are not many questions I find difficult to think of an answer, but it's one that I find really difficult to think. What would I say? Would I say to myself? X number of years ago. I think in a bizarre sort of way, I feel like I've got younger as I've got older mentally. Do you know what I mean? As in the sense, I think when I was younger, I was much more uptight. I was much more preoccupied about a whole host of things. And as I've got older, then I've whether I've regressed or whatever, whichever way you might think of it. So I think I feel as though there's been that shift as I got older, which feels a sense of liberation. That thing of worrying less about what you say or do, but being more comfortable with saying what you believe and what you feel. So that could be, but I think. So
I'm going to push you on this because you're incredibly articulate. I could sit and chat to you all day, but I need you to fit this into a short text message.
Yes.
The future of this podcast rests on this.
Right. Okay.
So we're gonna take that sentiment and squash it down into a text to young Jeremy.
I think in the main it would be try and ground yourself, try and allow yourself to think about the things that matter to you.
That was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Would that work for the text back to yourself?
Yeah, I think so. It's really because fundamentally, I think that's the deal. Try and work out. Allow yourself to think about what really matters to you.
Okay, Jeremy, it has been a delight, and no doubt I'll be chatting to you again soon. And we'll be looking around the new facility.
I hope so.
But thank you for joining me on the sofa.
Complete pleasure.
Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.